You thought we would never be back, and if Ethan had his way, we wouldn't be back. But regardless, here we are. Nick Hedrick, and a new face to Stranded in Pittsburgh, but not a new face to Stranded Sports as a whole. It's Nate Brysinger. Nate, thanks for joining me tonight.
It's an absolute pleasure to be back on a podcast for Stranded Sports.
That simple. Well said. I couldn't agree more. It's great to have you back. We were hoping to have a big welcome back party, but Ethan decided to go see Morgan Wallen tonight and sit behind the stage like a doofus. So if you're into that sort of thing, good for him, though, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he has no dedication to the podcast, I guess.
I guess not. Jackson Law School, like that's a good excuse.
That's a great excuse, actually.
I've been watching a lot of Suits. I've talked about that before on this show. It's some serious stuff he's going through, but Ethan's just, a little whipped action there, But I know all about that too. Just kidding. Anyway, Stranded to Pittsburgh. Great to be back after a few week hiatus. Nate Brysinger's here. Like I said, good friend of ours, local freelancer. We're going to talk about an article he wrote actually earlier this week, later in the show. So if you're not familiar with his work, you're going to learn all about it. But we're also going to talk about the professional teams, not just some college teams that Nate's been writing about, but the professional teams. And, of course, we'll start on the gridiron with the Pittsburgh Steelers. About a little over a week now from week one of NFL action kicking off. For the Steelers, at least, there's a Thursday night game, which we are exactly a week away from now. But anyway, Steelers have been really busy leading up to their first game of the season. 53-man roster was announced with 2 punters. One got cut, but rip to Zach Gentry, though, who I believe caught Ben's last pass and Kenny Pickett's first pass, which is a cool little factoid that I'm sure a lot of people will get that trivia question wrong 10 years down the line, but we know it now, so I guess that's good enough. Likewise, some offensive line movement. Kendrick Green dealt to Houston. Omar Khan, the jokes let him cook, and he was cooking getting anything for Kendrick Green. Kevin Dotson to the Rams, and perhaps the biggest storyline out of the Steelers this week was that Desmond King has signed to maybe fill in the nickel slot in that defensive secondary. Nate, anything here that really stands out to you? And do you think they've done a good job of addressing their needs throughout this whole offseason?
Absolutely. I think their biggest need was offensive line, and I think they really shored that up. And I know they shed some players who had not lived up to the, what the expectations were with Dotson and Kendrick Green, but I mean, they went out and they addressed their needs in the offseason. Signing a couple guys as well. So I think, offensively for Pickett, that'll be huge in the run game as well with Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren. So I think in the preseason, an undefeated preseason, looked really good. A lot of flashes of hope for the Steelers, especially offensively, I think is good. And then, in the secondary, they went out, you just mentioned getting King, but also Patrick Peterson drafting Joey Porter Jr. That secondary also, a little bit reshaped from what they once were last year. So, those 2 areas of need were definitely taken care of.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Peterson signing was, regardless of what you think about his ability or age, I think that showed how aggressive this team was going to be. They know they have some really good, strong pieces defensively right now. Obviously, T.J. Watt, but Cam Hayward and some other veterans on that team. And then to supplement them with Patrick Peterson and now Desmond King, it seems like they know what they've got in that defense. They're going to fill in the holes, and I think they have, as you said, have done a really good job doing that. Another storyline that I think either came out today or yesterday was Arthur Millette talking about how he definitely has these games against the Steelers circled. I don't want to come on here and dunk on Arthur Millette, but what do you make of those comments?
Yeah, no, it'll be a rivalry game, but seemed to be a guy that always took some criticism to heart. So, that's just the type of guy he is. So, going to play for Baltimore, so that'll be 2 big games on the Steelers' schedule, and for him himself trying to prove, those haters wrong or, the media, the criticism wrong. So I don't know. That's just a guy talking right now. I mean, for the Steelers, he was okay. He was so, but I mean, who knows how he'll fit in with the Ravens?
It's a good point. You never want to see someone go to a division rival and be good. I'm looking at Cincinnati and a particular player on their defensive secondary, but we won't get into that right now. Anyway, preseason is over, as we mentioned briefly. Steelers finishing undefeated. It's got a lot of Pittsburgh fans feeling pretty good. This was meant to be a topic last week before Ethan blew us off for the first time. He's done it twice, but this was the first time. We were talking about this last week. How hard do you think it is for Steelers fans to not totally get in over their head with sky-high expectations? People want this team to be good. It's been a few years. But that undefeated preseason, I think particularly the performance against the Bills, who walloped the Steelers during the regular season last year, because they did very well against their starters. People really grabbed onto that, seemed to run with it. What do you think Steeler fans should be feeling right now? You want to be a little more excited maybe, but I don't think people should be screaming Super Bowl or bust when the division or bust, and I've seen a lot of that, and I think people are starting to set expectations a little too high.
You know, I don't think it's a bad thing to set expectations too high because I mean it is the Steelers, the standard's the standard. I mean, you know how it is, especially with Tomlin. But like, I mean, I think this is a team that could easily compete for the number one spot in the AFC North. And now this is not a Super Bowl team. This is not a team that's going to go to the AFC Championship, but it's a team that can make the playoffs this year. I think a 10-win team is right around where they'll be. And I mean, I know there's a lot of people hyping up the Bengals and the Ravens, but I don't know. I mean, the Steelers have played them competitively, even when they had not so good teams. So, and I think the ending to last year was really a good proving point that this team can be competitive. I mean, that last game against the Ravens with Kenny Pickett, that last drive and the touchdown. And I think just the improvement we've seen just in the preseason for Pickett himself, and I think the accuracy is there. I think the deep ball passing is there. I mean, you saw some of those flashes with passes to Johnson and George Pickens. And, I mean, Pickens obviously is a guy who could really, really take the next step this year and be a top 15 receiver potentially, I mean, in the NFL. I mean, he's just got that type of talent. And if Pickett's going to be that good, that's where he could be. So, I mean, I think it's not a bad thing to set expectations so high. Now, obviously, if the Steelers underperform from those expectations, I think fans are going to be very upset and calling for Tomlin's head, which, I mean, this is still a team that's super young. I mean, besides a handful of players. I mean, Cam Hayward. So, you know, you'd like to see them live up to those expectations, those high expectations that people are setting. But I don't think it's a bad thing to have them that high.
That's very fair, and I like that you brought up how last season ended, because last season it really felt like they got in a groove. You know, the anniversary of the Immaculate Reception, that come from behind game against the Raiders, where you see Pickett launch one to Pickens in the end zone, and that was kind of the connection we were all hoping would come to fruition throughout the year, and to see it happen in a game winner setting, that was really fun to see and very encouraging to see. The Ravens game beating the Browns the last game of the season, those are all very gritty, fun AFC North kind of wins, baby. And as you brought up, this offense is still incredibly young. Yes, they signed Allen Robinson, who I think's on I don't know if I want to call it a prove-it deal, but he really did almost nothing last year with Matthew Stafford, but that was also an abysmal Rams team. But like I mentioned, you know, this defense is very well set off now, and now it's time for the offense really to get in a rhythm, maybe not have the defense bail them out, win them games like we've seen over the last 2 years, even dating back to Ben's last couple of years, relying on the defense to bail them out. And I'm really excited to see what happens, because I think this is a young team that maybe has some swagger now based on how last year ended. And AFC North's always going to beat up on each other. So this division, you could probably make a case any team wins it. But I'm going to say, and I try not to be a homer too much, but don't be surprised if Pittsburgh's in the mix at the end.
And the one thing you can almost guarantee is that the Steelers will not finish last place in the division, because they haven't done that in, decades. So, but the other thing also is, I mean, there's going to be some growing pains offensively. I mean, we just know that's going to be the case. Still with Pickett and a young receiver core, and the offensive line still not completely, you don't know what's going to happen with them. But I think as long as TJ Watt is healthy and playing every game, defensively, we can see them win a bunch of games for them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, defensively with Pittsburgh, you know what you're going to get. They've done a good job keeping the really key pieces around, maybe letting some of the backups or filling guys when someone needs a breather, letting them guys go, but keeping the main core there. And I think defensively, you know what the Steelers are going to bring you. Probably a turnover or so a game. They're going to get in your face, and they're going to run to the opposite end zone after a turnover and dance, whether they're tied, whether they're down 21, or whether they're winning by 21. But, we're 1 week away now, and next week, assuming we do a show, which is never a guarantee anymore, we're not bitter about it at all. We'll get into the Steelers' schedule a little more and probably just do a Steelers special episode unless something crazy happens, like another Pittsburgh athlete begins dating a famous TikTok influencer. Anyway, speaking of that team, which is the Pirates, Andrew McCutchen still sitting at 299. Last week we had a topic of will he get to 300 by this week's episode, but you never heard it. Anyway, he's at 299 since he hit 299 off Adam Wainwright, who coincidentally Pittsburgh will go up against on Sunday in St. Louis. So, Nate, I ask you the question, does he get it done this weekend against the Cards? / do you even want him to, or do you want him to do it at home against Milwaukee?
It'd be nice for him to do it at home, but I think there's a good shot because, his familiarity with that ballpark, and I think there's a good shot that he hits one. And isn't it crazy that Bryce Harper hit it before McCutchen could have?
Yeah, I saw that yesterday. It's like, oh my God, what year is it? But you have to remember, Bryce has been playing since he probably got out of wearing Pampers, so he's been in the league a while.
And he's hitting at a clip of 30 home runs at least a year. So no, but I think there's a good shot McCutchen can hit it, and maybe I shouldn't watch this series this weekend or maybe I should, so he hits it versus Milwaukee, because it seems like every game I watch, I never see him hit a home run, and then the games I'm not watching, he's hitting home runs. So maybe that's what needs to happen.
Yeah, he's been fun to watch this year, obviously for the reasons you would expect, but he's done better than he has been playing his past couple seasons. I think up until recently he was hitting over 250, 260, and there's just a swagger back to his game that you really like to see, and that could just be me not paying much attention to what he did when he wasn't in the black and gold, but he's been a pleasure to watch this year. He had a very long home run drought before he hit 298 and 299 in the span of a couple days, and now it's been a week plus since his last one, I believe. But it's exciting, and it would kind of be nice to see him do it against St. Louis, where he arguably hit his most infamous home run, that bottom of the 14th one, the walk-off, where Bob Walk and Greg Brown sounded like they were very, very excited. I was going to say something that was a little more inappropriate, but they were very, very excited about that home run, and I believe Bob Walk shouted, "Oh my God," or was that Steve Blatt? I can't remember who it was, but whoever the color commentator was screamed, "Oh my God," about 700 times while Greg Brown tried to find words. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm not sure if you should be listening to a Pittsburgh sports-specific show or not, but go YouTube that one and see it. But yeah, I think it'd be great to see him hit one off of Adam Wainwright in St. Louis. But there is another part of me that would be upset if he doesn't get his flowers from that Pittsburgh crowd and get the tip the cap to them.
Yeah, and I know he's got a lot of homecoming treatment this year with the home opener and, a couple other milestones so far this year. But, it would stink if he didn't hit it in Pittsburgh. But also, isn't it fitting to hit it against one of the most competitive teams he's played against his whole career with St. Louis? That's always been a team, a thorn in his side with, the Pirates, and then when he played in Milwaukee, too.
Yeah, exactly. They've been a foe of his for a long time. I believe Cutch's 2000th hit came at home. So getting one of those at home would be nice.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to look for. Couldn't remember which one. I was at the game 2 nights before that, of course, so I missed that one. I was there 2 nights before, so we were all of us everyone had their phones out hoping he would get that hit, but nope, didn't come.
He didn't sit on that too long, I don't think, but it was like a game or two. This could be completely wrong, but I remember he made us wait. He made us sweat a little bit. But The home run's a little harder to come by, but he still has that beautiful swing. It looks so good, man. After he hit 290, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say though, you have to admit you talked about the swagger that he's brought back to the team. You gotta look at you ever see him when he walks, when he gets a walk on base, he like whips his bat across back towards the dugout and stuff. I mean, he's just because he's so good at drawing walks that instead of a home run, he's more hyped about getting on base doing that.
Right. I'm always afraid they're going to call a strike on him the way he whips that bat because he technically like almost breaks the plane once he realizes it's a ball. It could be like way up here, but it hasn't crossed the plate yet, and he's already kind of whipping the bat across.
Yeah, he is.
I'm worried there's going to be a really petty umpire one game, but I guess it hasn't happened yet, so I'm not too concerned. But I think it'd be funny kind of to see if anyone ever picks up on that and calls a strike. We'll move back to the gridiron now. First of two college topics we got here. Pitt football is back. I've lived in the Pittsburgh area for about 6 years. I know the bare minimum of Pitt football history and lore, but this guy right over this direction, this guy knows a lot about Pitt football. So we're going to pick his brain for a little bit here, Nate. This is a team that is very intriguing to me and got a lot of veteran presences. Is that the plural presence? Presences on this team. Whether it's transfers or homegrown guys. You got a new quarterback in Phil Jurkovec, who's over here from Boston College, a fellow ACC team, playing in what should be an ACC team in Notre Dame before he got to Pitt, too. What do you make of some of the key players on this team? How do you think the new QB is going to slot in? And frankly, what do you just think of the roster, I guess, would be a good way to summarize the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was tough for, the offseason they've had because they lost so many players to the NFL draft, but that's a good thing, and that's the type of talent Pat Narduzzi's been building at Pitt for the past couple of years. But this year, looking at the roster, I think there's a couple question marks, but that have been filled in by guys that have played, who have experience already. So I think there's question marks to the general fans, but I think to the people who pay attention to this team pretty regularly that they know there's some guys that should just basically replace, and especially at the D-line. You lose Kalajic Kancey, who was an All-American defensive player in the year in the ACC, but you have four guys at the interior line position that are going to, rotate in, and a lot of them are, you talk about Phil Jurkovec being homegrown, but Pitt has a lot of homegrown defensive guys as well, and defensively in the D-tackle position, David Green's a West Mifflin guy. He's either fifth or sixth year. I mean, he's been on this roster for quite a while, but he's a guy that's going to slate in there. Devin Danielson's a TJ guy. So they have a lot of, guys stepping in that are Whitfield kids, which is always fun to watch. And, if you're from the Pittsburgh area, those are kids you either watched in high school or you played against if, you're a former high school football player. So I think this roster defensively is going to be pretty solid. I mean, over the past 4 years, they've had the most sacks in the FBS, and I think they're going to continue that trend. Now, in the secondary, they have some questions, not specifically at cornerback, but at safety. They lost Eric Hallett and Brandon Hill to both of their safeties, so they have some guys slotting in that, it'll be interesting to see. Stephen Hall from Central Valley, Whitfield kid. Donovan McMillan transferring back from Florida, Whitfield kid also. So they have a lot of guys who can really step in and fill those roles of guys who went to the NFL. But I think it all comes down to Phil Jurkovec. So we'll see how he is. I think he's an upgrade from Keaton Slovis. I mean, Slovis last year I think cost Pitt a couple games. I mean, not obviously all on him, but there was a couple games that they could have won. They lost to Georgia Tech, a team who had no coach at the time. They lost to a Louisville team they probably should have not have lost to. But I think Jurkovec brings better skill set than Slovis did.
Yeah, Pitt in their transfer quarterbacks have been a little iffy between Slovis and Max Brown, who's a former guest on this show. Of course, he got injured pretty short into his Pitt tenure, but so it's going to be exciting to see what Jurkovec can do here. Nate, their first three games are against Wofford, which is 3:30 this Saturday. Nice little FCS school. Then you have Cincinnati at home before they go to West Virginia for the backyard brawl. What do you think the record is at the end of these three games here?
I just think the talent level on this team, and I think with Jurkovec being a better fit at quarterback, I think you're going to win against Wofford. Cincinnati's not as good as they once were 2 years ago, a playoff caliber team. And without Luke Fickell as their coach, I think they're going to have some rough adjustment period here to start this year. And West Virginia, obviously, I mean, that's a toss-up. I don't think you can decide because that's what it was last year. It was a toss-up, and everyone was thinking Pitt was going to come away with that game. But in that fourth quarter, it didn't even look like Pitt was going to win that game. If it wasn't for, lucky Izzy Abanikanda touchdown. Not lucky, but, it was about a 30-yard touchdown, and then the lucky pick six from Devonshire. Because if Bryce Ford Wheaton doesn't drop that ball, that never happens, or at least deflects it right to him. So I think it's a toss-up. I think Pitt can win that game. I think they should start 3-0. That's what I'm going to say. But there's a chance. With any rivalry game, right? It's just how it is. And being in Morgantown, you look back and you read some of the things from the past with this rivalry. Pitt's going to roll their buses in there and get bottles thrown at their buses. And they're going to go into a hostile environment more than it was at Acrisure Stadium last year. So it's going to be a toss-up. I think it's a one-score game again. But I think Pitt I think they have more of a veteran presence from some of their guys on their team that have played in this game last year. West Virginia had another good bit of turnaround on their roster, so I just think Pitt has this game by maybe a touchdown.
Yeah, college football, and it's justified, but there's a lot of people who watch college football and say, who's going to win a lot of the games. It's very top-heavy, which is true to an extent, but some of these rivalry games, and the backyard brawl being one of them, that's a game where brawl's a very good term to have in the title of that game. It's going to be a brawl. They're both going to leave it all out there. That was evident last season, and it's going to be a very fun game to watch, but that's still a few weeks away. But Nate, I want to really pick your brain here about what do you think the difference between a good season and a bad season is for this Pitt Panthers team? And by that I mean, what's going to be the difference between this team doing really well and this team doing below expectations?
I think you know what you're going to get with your defense. I think pretty much the expectations have been set defense on the D line, and like I said, at the safety position and even at the linebacker position, there's some guys that have a little bit of question marks around them, but it comes down to Djokovic and how he connects with the wide receivers, because that's exactly what happened last year. You had a good running game, and I think they're going to have the same type of running game as well with Rodney Hammond back there again. He had a big game in the bowl game versus UCLA, scoring 4 touchdowns. And his, the second guy in line to him, Sebo Flemister, Notre Dame transfer last year, as the third guy last year, fit pretty well. I think he has a nice skill set to him, a good back that can cut well through and find holes. But I think it just comes down to the passing game, because last year the wide receivers weren't very proven. They brought in Kanata Mumpfield and Bub Means, from the transfer portal and they lost Addison last year. So that was a big loss for them. But I think depending on how those two do, and also it's interesting to see last year Gavin Bartholomew took a step back, and I don't know if that was more of because of Keaton Slovis or just he wasn't as open as much, and because he was on the All ACC rookie team his first year with Kenny Pickett throwing him the ball. So if Bartholomew can go back to where he was 2 years ago, Means, Mumfield also being capable receivers, I think it comes down to the passing game.
Mm-hmm. And looking at their schedule, I don't know if you have it up or have looked at it or maybe even memorized it because your brain's much better performing than mine. What game do you think poses probably the biggest challenge to this Pitt team this year?
I think the toughest games come actually at home, which benefits Pitt because they don't have a very tough road schedule, but their games, especially in conference, because this year there's no divisions in the ACC, so every game really matters, because once you lose 1 or 2 games, once you lose, I think, 2 games, you're really on the outside looking in, and who knows, maybe the ACC beats up on each other this year, but you have Florida State at home in November, I believe, right? And I think that's on November 4th. I think that is their biggest game. They have North Carolina prior to that, and if they lose that game, then they're already 1 loss in the ACC. Florida State's expected to be, a lot of people have them going to the college football playoff, or at least in the top 6. So I think, that game is really the one that's going to define their season, because at that point they really should only have 1 ACC loss, they might have 2 overall losses, depending on how they do at Notre Dame the weekend prior to that. But that Florida State game is going to be really tough, and it's a good thing, though. It's beneficial that it comes on home turf for Pitt.
Yeah, I agree. And much like AFC North football, ACC football, always beating up on each other. People also get beat up in hockey, which is a horrible transition, but we're going to roll with it anyway. Nate, you and I are both RMU products. RMU cutting their hockey program shortly after I graduated in 2021 to a lot of fanfare, a lot of backlash, a lot of furious people. Yet here we are a little over 2 years later, and programs are back. You were at men's hockey's first practice, and I wanted to talk to you about the article you wrote for the Trib here a little bit and kind of see what the atmosphere was like in the Clearview Arena. And I guess the obvious question would be, did it feel like it was a refresh, like a restart, or did it kind of feel like business as usual, no time had even passed?
I think for me it was, definitely, because I had the chance to cover the teams before they were disbanded. I think it was more of a restart. All the new faces that were there, they have a ton of transfers in, a lot of freshmen, and I think the one thing that was noticeable, I didn't mention in the story, but the size of this team is a lot different. It's a lot of smaller guys. I mean, that year they got disbanded. I mean, Justin Adamo, who was 6'6", was on that team. Granny Bear was like 6'5". They don't have anybody taller than 6'2". Maybe one guy, if I'm wrong, but it's a completely new roster besides 3 guys, and then they had a couple freshmen that were at the school last year that got to practice with them. So, I mean, it's a new start, but I think the good thing is Derek Scully's back for his 18th season, so that's a big thing. Unlike the women's side of things, I mean, they have Logan Biddle, who was an assistant coach for so long, but he's a new head coach there for the program. But the men's team, I mean, they have a lot of young guys, and then they have about 6 or 7 grad transfers that come in, 3 from Mercyhurst, 1 from Boston College, and another guy from Michigan Tech that all have some experience playing already in the NCAA, and some guys who also have been to the tournament also. So this guy, Mitch Andres from Boston College, got to play in the tournament, the guy from Michigan Tech. So they have some experience, at least, with guys coming and transferring in.
I hate to make this comment yet again, but Atlantic hockey, that's a tough conference. Everybody's beating up on each other.
It really is.
I hate to say it, but I think every team in the Pittsburgh area just likes to play conferences where there's always just a mad dash to the end, and it's always very close right up until the end there. How do you think this team does in terms of finding its sea legs and, getting into the groove and maybe competing with some of those top dogs? And, how do they have – what do you, I guess, to summarize it, what do you take as a successful first season back here?
I think, they're not going to be a top dog in Atlantic hockey like they were the year they got cut. I mean, they were a team that was one of the top teams, finished at the top of the Atlantic hockey the year they got cut. So, but I think with Derek Scully as the head coach, he'll get them right back in. And the only thing is, when I talked to him, he said he's not sure what type of team they'll be. They could be a fast team, they could be a physical team. Those are all type of teams he's had before. But, I mean, he's really been known to have physical and solid defensive teams. So we'll see if that's how they, find their niche in Atlantic hockey. But I think the one thing really going for them, though, is they have their number 1 goaltender in Chad Veltri, and Veltri knows the league really well. 99 career games with Niagara, was actually the last team to beat RMU before they got shut down. So the local kid, he's from Fox Chapel. So I think with him being in at the goaltender position in the number 1 spot, that would be very helpful. So they don't have any concern about that. They know who their guy is. But I think it'll be, tough for them. Watching the practice, there was no one really skill-wise that stood out, skater-wise. So it'll be interesting to see how the lines shake up. And I think also the other thing that is not that good for them is they don't have a big non-conference schedule. I mean, they only have about, 6 or 8 games, I think, in the non-conference slate of things. So they really get into Atlantic hockey play pretty quickly. And that's basically the bulk of their schedule. So, expect probably about a 500 team. I would assume in Atlantic hockey, they're going to have those growing pains for sure, in their first year back.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we heard from RMU before this happened, this was before COVID, obviously, and things have changed immensely, but you don't need me to tell you that, was Chris King, RMU's athletic director, basically talking. I was sitting in on an interview with him and a colleague of mine at Student Media talking about how they're the only D1 hockey team in Pittsburgh. That's, not a club team, obviously, like at Pitt, and they wanted to invest in that and market that. And then this all kind of happened. There was even talks of expanding the island, adding more seating, making it a nicer facility. Do you think, or is there any inclination you've received about them kind of tapping into hockey that way? Obviously, it might be a little weird to bring them back and see the school throwing millions of dollars at them right away when allegedly they couldn't fund the team to begin with a couple years ago. But is there any chirps you're hearing, anything indicating that, maybe a few years down the line, once things are back to the status quo, they start making some of those strides to make this program a little more flashy and kind of really branded as Pittsburgh college hockey team?
There's nothing that I've heard, but it definitely seems like they want to take this momentum that they've built and run with it, because the thing that, worries me is that this team's going to be here, they're going to have a good first year with, ticket sales and whatnot, but 3-4 years down the line, they're going to be in a similar position. And you hope that's not the case, with that program. Hopefully they can get the funding to continue, which I think will happen. But, going into this year, they're really trying to kick it off well. When we were down there, they're putting fresh coats of paint in the Clearview Arena. They're everything looks pretty good. They invested in new locker rooms. They recently redid those. So, they have already put some money in since they've been reinstated. On that home opening weekend, they're supposed to have a big, party tailgate in the parking lot, little celebration to kick things off. So I think that, especially Chris King as the athletic director, I think he's trying to get a lot of money to go into different programs. They just put in a new scoreboard at Joe Walton Stadium. So I think, hockey will get to that point where they'll continue to grow and get the necessary funding, hopefully at least over the next couple of years, to sustain themselves.
Mm-hmm. And, talking about your worries with attendance, I've mentioned those in private to people, how long do they sustain the sold-out season tickets? I don't know if that's a fact or not. But how long do they sustain, big crowds? Because covering hockey, and I did play-by-play a lot my sophomore and junior year for hockey games for Student Media. We might have even done a game together, Nate, and that's why
we did women's hockey.
That's why our chemistry is impeccable here. Just kidding, maybe, I don't know. But, it's frustrating because women's hockey, you can make the case, was the best team on that campus, and there's 10 people at a game, and that's through no fault of their own. The product's great. They have people like J.C. Gebhard breaking program records at that time. But unfortunately, when you have a doubleheader, the women's game starts at 3 o'clock on a Friday, and, people just aren't going to be able to really swing that. So it's obviously something that you have to think about, and you would love to see an investment because, again, even if the men's team isn't good, they're going to be competitive. There's always a chance they get through the first round or first couple rounds in their conference tournament. These are fun teams to watch, and I'm a hockey fan, not the biggest hockey fan, even in this call, but hockey's a fun sport to watch. They're the best teams on campus, and it's exciting to catch a college hockey game in the right atmosphere. And when RMU plays teams like Penn State, or has a home playoff game, or plays a bigger program, you see people come in droves, whether it's other teams filling the arena, or whether it's actually the student body, and it's a very fun little atmosphere, and you would hope they can find a way to make the accommodations nicer to the more casual fan to come and enjoy RMU hockey down the line, so people keep getting packed into the island. I'll always call it the island. I'm not calling it the Clearview Arena. Sorry, RMU. Even though I think I called it that earlier because I was trying to be professional. But it's past the half-hour mark, which means we go from rated PG to rated R. So anyway, Nate, you mentioned some people that stayed. Cammy Bear's on this squad. His brother, sister, whole family has connections to RMU hockey as a whole, not just one team or the other. You had some really good conversation with him from what I gathered from the quotes in your article. Can you just kind of touch on that family story and, how they've stuck through with RMU this whole time?
Yeah, with Granny Bear, who was the older brother of Cam and Allie, they were pretty disappointed. I mean, that talked to Cam about it and also Allie about it as well. That they didn't get to have a senior night with him and didn't get to all be on the ice together like they hoped for. And he went on to transfer to Maine, and now he's actually playing some professional hockey in Texas. So he's doing pretty well for himself. But I mean, it was pretty heartbreaking for that family. And I've talked to Cam even more beyond the conversation I had with him the other night at the island. But Cam's expected to be a leader for this team for the men's hockey, and Allie's expected to be a leader for the women's hockey team. So it'll be interesting to see those two back on the ice. And I know their family's gone through a lot. I mean, they're from Ontario, and that was sort of their home. And once Grant realized that he only had 2 more years left of eligibility, that he was going to jump to a different program, but Cam and Allie decided to stick it out, and those were hard times for both of them because they were practicing on the ice together. The men's and women's teams practiced together, and with 4 other players, because from those 2 teams that were cut, they had 3 on each team stay, so they were just practicing 6 people at one point when they could, and I mean that was difficult. Cam said it was a roller coaster for him, and Allie said for her it was RMU was home and they didn't want to leave. So it'll be pretty special for them to be out there once again on that home opening night. Talking to Cam, he said his brother Grant's going to try to make it depending on what his schedule looks like, whether or not it's training camp for his respective team that he's with now. So, but yeah, I mean it's a very interesting story for them and their family.
Yeah, and you can read more about that in Nate's piece on The Trib. What a professional man he is.
What a great plug. Thanks.
I'm just trying my best. You got to look out for each other here, this freelancer gang. Moving on, staying on the ice, though, Carl Hagelin, Penguin 2-time Stanley Cup champion, retiring due to what he called a serious eye injury. Jack O'Brien told us to mention that he is a Michigan product. I never looked to fact check that. I don't know the history of Carl Hagelin, but Jack told us to tell all of you that, and it's Jack's birthday, and he would be here if he could. But happy birthday to Jack. And, he definitely would be here if he could. He's not the kind of guy to make excuses an hour before the show saying he can't make it. That's just not Jack. Law school is a busy time, and that's a great excuse. And if you're going to miss this show, you have to have a good excuse, or else you're in my bad graces. And that's why Jack might be a little higher than Ethan on the pedestal right now, but that's okay. And I'm not bitter at all. But Nate, what are your overall thoughts on Carl Hagelin hanging up the skates?
It's sad to see him go. He's only 35, so I'm sure he had a couple years left. But that's just how sports is in general. Injuries sideline players and players' careers. But he was a really exciting player for the Penguins when he was here for those few seasons, and to help them win 2 Stanley Cups was immense. I mean, he was part of the the Kessel line with Bonino, the HBK line. But I think Hagelin's speed was always very well known in the league. I mean, he was one of the for years, one of the top speedsters in the entire game. And when the Penguins were able to get a hold of him and put them on their team, that's the type of team the Pens had built for those 2 Stanley Cup runs with speed, and Hagelin was a huge factor in it. Couple really, really important goals during those runs, and the one that stands out to me, and it's not like it's a massive goal, but in terms of how he scored it, but it just massive in itself, being the Stanley Cup clinching game, was the game against Nashville, Game 6, where he scored the empty netter to sort of seal the deal. I mean, just his speed, if you watch the clip back, he just was able to break away from the 2 defenders, PK Subban and whoever else was flanking him on the other side of things. But, Hagelin's speed was able to break away and score that final empty netter and to win them the Stanley Cup. He was just a very, very good third-line role player for the Pens. And I, as a hockey fan, watching him even before the Penguins, I knew what he was going to bring to the team, and he was a very exciting player to watch.
Yeah, that goal for New York that eliminated the Penguins in 2015?
Yeah, the year prior.
Yeah, I didn't forget. I didn't forget Carl. But no, the empty netter obviously got a good reaction out of a younger version of myself. And when you look back on those teams, he's probably not going to be the first guy you think of. But once you do come up with his name, you're going to think of, wow, what a good, as you said, I don't even know if depth guy does it justice for what he brought to the team, but he's a guy who laid it all out there, was a little scrappy and had some big moments, and he'll definitely be missed in the league. But it's a shame he went to Washington. I will throw that in there, and it's a shame that the our time together for this week is coming to an end, Nate. But it was great to have you along for
Absolutely.
for the ride here. It's
Yeah,
great.
I'm looking forward to these every week.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll see if Ethan decides to make an appearance or not.
You know, that would be great. It would be very great if Ethan showed up. You know, Nate and I haven't podcast together in some time. So if you said, wow, these guys have no chemistry at all, give us like 1 week. We'll be good. We're connected now. He was at my wedding, okay? There's a connection here. But you need that middleman like Ethan to be here to bully him. But that's
Exactly.
okay. But anyway, this has been Straight in Pittsburgh. We'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves.